In fact, one thing you should definitely remember is that this fantasy world is in your own head. In reality, you're only typing words on a computer screen. Just keep telling yourself that. No matter
All right, everyone. Welcome to Internet Real Life. It's a series co-hosted by Katherine Dee, a default friend, and myself. So to set some context for the series, Katherine and I independently were both feeling disappointed with the wider conversation that was happening around culture and specifically online culture. And the conversation just felt stuck, like uh, like it wasn't really going anywhere. And while we don't have any kind of concrete answers, we felt called to create this like secret research project that turned into an interview series to explore what the internet could be, or wants to be, or what we want it to be. So we're very happy that we had such quality applications. So thanks everyone for applying. And yeah, the series is 5 sessions scheduled with 4 guests, and each session will start with a presentation and a Q&A for the first hour, which will be recorded. And then the following hour will be non-recorded with a group dialogue. And the guests that we're having are like extremely online people or people really plugged into internet culture, but are weaving artfully IRL experiences. So we have JREG, Justin, Ruby, Justin Thelot, Honor Levy, who just released a book, my first book. We're having a book reading on that, and Reggie James. So Raven, if you can just wave your hand, she'll be our MC for the series, and she's doing some really interesting internet real life activities in Europe. She'll start us off in a moment. But first, I'm going to tag in my co-host, Katherine Dee, writer, cultural commentator who explores internet subcultures, digital intimacy, and the evolution of online communities. And her work really explores brilliantly how like internet dynamics shape modern identity and relationships. So Katherine, gonna take you in.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Yeah, I'm really excited to get this going. Readers of mine will know I am very frustrated by uh, internet pessimism, and this idea that everything bad in the world is downstream of the phones and social media. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, right? But yeah, I wanted a space to push back on that a little bit, without sort of blindly accepting the internet optimist point of view that says, in fact, nothing's wrong with the internet. Let's be more plugged in. There has to be a different way, another option, and that's what this is all about.
Great, thanks, Kat. And hi, everyone. My name is Raven. Maybe you remember me from back in the early Stoa days. I'm going to be emceeing this evening or morning. For me, it's the evening in Stockholm. For you, maybe it's midday. I'm also a co-founder of Dark Renaissance Network, which is an organization that actually is weaving these two things together, and that's part of what I'm doing here in Europe. And I'm also here because I wrote a piece on my Substack Ritual Lab that was about this subject, about how the internet is changing and IRL is also changing. I'm going to tag in Peter, and we're going to move to his presentation.
Cool. So I thought I'd start high level because the Stoa, for those of you who don't know, it's like a philosophy light platform. Well, I mean, it's not that light, it's kind of heavy sometimes. So I thought I'd engage with a dialectic that I see occurring the wider conversation on technology. So these are not my terms, these are terms that already exist, but you can say the thesis is a techno-optimism, and basically tech good, let's fucking go, let's accelerate, let's create, it's going to solve all the world's problems. And then there's this techno-pessimism, and tech is bad, we got to touch grass, and the fate of humanity's on the line if we don't get into right relationship with this thing. And then techno-realism it's this the synthesis is like tech can be bad or good, and it depends on us. So instead of going through each of these in depth, I thought I'd pick intuitively a representative for each, and have a quote from them. So this is Marc Andreessen. He's entrepreneur, tech investor, and I think it was 2 years ago he wrote the Techno Optimism Manifesto, which I'm curious if people read. Maybe share in the chat if you read what you thought about it. But here's a quote that quite represents the essence of that manifesto. We believe that there is no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved with more technology. And yeah, so it's basically all the world's problems will be solved by more technology, bringing AI in a robust way, and more intelligence is altogether better. And nature should be subservient to technology, which is, I think, explicitly what was written in the manifesto. And so, you get the tech bros, effective accelerationism, these type of movements that would be explicitly techno-optimism. And the antithesis, I picked Uncle Ted, the Unabomber. I know this might be an extreme example, but I feel like if you read his 1995 manifesto, it really captures a lot of the techno-pessimism that is being spoken about today. And here's a quote from the manifesto. It is not possible to make a lasting compromise between technology and freedom because technology is by far the more powerful social force and continually encroaches on freedom through repeated compromises. And if you read the manifesto, he basically outlines a hellish future if we keep having unchecked technological progress, which he referred to the machine. Basically, he argued that there's going to be a surplus population of humans that either the machines or take fully over, or a sociopathic elite maintains control of the machines, and they just wipe out the surplus population. And the only way to avoid this hellish future is essentially collapse and return to nature, so deceleration. And so if you notice, this is interesting contrast, nature, technology, between the techno-pessimism and realism. So I should say techno-optimism and pessimism. And then a synthesis, the techno-realism, I had a hard time kind of thinking of who would be a good candidate, because, the techno-optimists probably would call themselves realists, and so would the techno-pessimists. And so Daniel Schmachtenberger, a friend of the Stoa, for those of you probably know Daniel Schmachtenberger, the Stoa, and there he is with his like epic beard, holding the weight of the meta crisis on his shoulders. And this is one of his famous quotes: "As technology is empowering our choices and we are getting something like the power of gods, you have to have something like the love and wisdom of gods to wield that, or you self-destruct." So he's acknowledging the Uncle Ted argument that, okay, there's a lot of danger of just unchecked technology, but it's not like we have to get rid of it altogether. We have to be in a right relationship with it. So something of wisdom, being in a wise relationship with technology and technological progress is the recommendation here. And, this is all great and kind of the abstract level, but like technology is such a big word. And then when you kind of drill down, like what is actually the difference between technology and nature? How do you define those two? And like, are we talking about like lawnmowers, or are we just talking about kind of like computing technology? What are we actually talking about here? And so for the purposes of, I quite like this dialectic. It's kind of clean and it's interesting. It has like clear representatives of each. But for the purpose of this conversation and the interest space of especially Katherine and myself, we thought we'd swap the word techno with internet. So internet optimism, the internet will save us. Internet pessimism, internet will destroy us. Internet realism, what is that? What is the internet realist position? So intuitively, Katherine probably has better representatives here, but felt like early Mark Zuckerberg, eager beaver, straight out of Harvard, and Facebook, and his like social mission for Facebook. So this is a public letter, this quotes from this public letter that he wrote. Facebook was not originally created to be a company. It was built to accomplish a social mission, to make the world more open and connected. So in like the 90s, there was a lot of these philosophers, intellectuals that were very internet optimists. But I felt Zuckerberg represented like the one of the like archetypal entrepreneurs that sort of embodied this ethos that the internet is going to like make the world more open and connected. And yeah, how did that go? And well, we kind of know, and I don't want to get into all the pessimism. And there's many different options I had. And Katherine was just like giving me a slew of who would represent internet pessimism. But she put this person on my radar, Humdog. He was an early internet pioneer, community kind of like forum manager. And she wrote this like 1994 piece, which was quite influential. Here's a quote from it. Cyberspace is a black hole. It absorbs energy and personality and then represents it as an emotional spectacle. And she kind of talks about the kind of the commodification of one's like avatar online, their second self, and just the just how it can bend you. And it was a really good article. I wish like I read it like years ago to save me a lot of trouble. But the sentiment is basically being represented now by a lot of people who are just feel like pessimistic about the internet and the toxic aspects of it, whether it's the culture war, surveillance, just like the cringe narcissism that emerges. And then one thing that like this essay really brought is, and I was talking to Katherine about this, is sort of like this pull that the internet has, these screens have, and it's almost like this lack of agency. It's impulsive. I just like have to check this. I have to look at this. And I don't feel good doing that. And I think a lot of people don't feel good having this kind of like lack of sovereignty with this pull. But like, sometimes this like touch grass ethos goes a little too far and the internet is altogether evil. We have to get off it completely. But what's an internet realism position? What's something like where we honor the good of the internet, but then, try to sidestep the bad of it, but recognize, it could be good and bad. Like, what is this position? Who represents this? I don't know. I couldn't find anyone. But then, boom, my girl, Katherine Dee. I think she might have some theory sketches here about what internet realism could be. So yeah, I'm going to take in what Katherine's going to present in a moment, but I'll just pause here. I think Raven might have a question or two.
Yeah, so I'm curious, for you with running the STOA, did this feel like an internet realist project for you looking back, or do you feel like this was an optimistic project? How do you see the STOA from this lens?
No, that's a good question. I never thought about that. I think it was like the spirit of, internet realism. I really tried to make the spirit of it because I wasn't really clout chasing. I tried not to it was about the in-person experience. And most of the things that we had were kind of not recorded. And a lot of people, I think like yourself, you met a lot of cool people through the bump room that the STOA afforded. So it wasn't about kind of winning in the attention economy, which I think a lot of people they're like impulsively, like you just get like sucked into that pull. Like, we got to get my second self, my avatar, as big as it possibly can be. I felt that pull, but I resisted against it. But that being said, even though I might have had the spirit of internet realism, I was quite naive, and a lot of there's a lot of just weird parasocial dynamics happened that kind of turned me off of doing the STOA how I did it. And it was also a child of the pandemic. Everyone was extremely online because they had to be. And so I probably wouldn't do something like that now.
Yeah, interesting. I also feel like a lot of the conversations got to a point where it was like, okay, but this is just on Zoom. So do you think in a way having this meta discussion was kind of an inevitable part of the evolution of the STOA, that eventually you would get to this point where you would have to confront internet realism as a actual kind of philosophical and spiritual question?
Yeah, it's another good question. It's like Sarah, Raven was especially the first couple of years of the STOA, you were there for a lot of sessions, and then we were listening to all these like really smart galaxy brain sense makers that were basically saying in order to make it gotta stop making sense on the internet, and we got to like go in person, real life, connect, get real communion, and create a scene essentially. And so like, this sense making to scene making kind of that transition. And then there's just a massive fatigue about just hearing that kind of the same message over and over again, just, spoken differently. It's like, okay, let's kind of do it now. And that's exactly what you're doing in Sweden. A lot of people in this room are doing as well. And the people that we're going to speak to in the series are doing. But it's like, it's a new kind of project because again, it's not getting rid of the internet completely, or it's like, how can we, be in right relationship with both in-person happenings, but also leverage the internet because it's still a wonderful place to find the others.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. So now let's turn to Kat. Internet realism.
All right. So what is internet realism? Have we ever been internet realists? And can internet realism exist if everyone's online? So internet realism, I think, is simply put, is using the internet as a tool, and recognizing tools can be good or bad, right? What's interesting is that when we have taken sort of an internet realist position, it spurs internet optimism, and we get pushed further into the online world. And then what comes next? Internet pessimism. We hate it, right? And there's been many flashpoints, I think, of internet realism. Anytime the internet is used to organize in the physical world, right? And that's happened several times throughout the internet's lifespan. When we're using it for a tangible physical world purpose, that to me is an internet realist expression of our internet use, right? So after the Arab Spring happens, it's like, oh wow, Twitter is this great tool for political organizing. But this also happened with Facebook, right? Facebook was best when it really was just a way to connect with people you had already met in real life. So first, I think for most ordinary people, it needs to be local, intentional, and physical. And by physical, I mean you're not using it as a replacement. You're using it as a supplement, right? For most ordinary people, the internet should not be an alternative world. Instagram should really be for sharing photos, right? So something else we'll need to consider is as we move things in the physical world, status also needs to be anchored in the physical world. You shouldn't be trying to like mog every stranger online. You just want to one up your neighbor, right? So I've always been like a big supporter of something like Nextdoor, or Facebook groups or Facebook events, because I feel like it very often brings people back into physical reality. But there are some people for whom that's not an option. They can't, for whatever reason, exist in the physical world. It might be because of a disability. It might be because of where they live. I do think there is a very small population of people where it does make sense for it to be an alternative world, and it should still exist as that for them. So we raise a barrier to entry. It should be much more difficult to live online, right? You should have to really want it. I've often said that I think even making it more difficult to sign up for websites would make that a reality. I mean, part of the problem here is, of course, like incentive structures, and this is sort of a dream. And the last part is, depending on what the internet is being used for, I don't think this is a question that gets tossed around a lot is like, is it because it's too anonymous? The internet's never really been anonymous, right? The closest we have is maybe like doing image boards. No, I think it should be all three, depending on the usage, right? You should be able to have your pseudonym, you should be able to use your real name, and you should have options for anonymity. It just depends on what you're using it for. I think for most people, if it's more local, if it's more of a tool to help connect people in person. And I do think this is very possible. I don't think this is an internet optimist position. You use your real name, but if you're using it to learn about interests, why not? Why not have anonymity? I don't think the identity structure is a problem in the way people think it is. So to me, these are the things we need to focus on to reach an internet realist position. And yeah, I mean, I recognize there are problems. Is it possible to get to this point? I don't actually know if it is.
Great. Thanks, Katherine. I love this frame, internet realism. I think it's like super helpful for understanding what we seem to already be going through. Do you feel like you're picking up on something that's moving throughout the zeitgeist? And that's part of why this idea is coming forth. And what are you seeing like on the ground in your circles?
I think there's a backlash to how online everyone became during COVID and everything moving online. Dating apps. I mean, I think dating apps are a big part of it, but also like the oversaturation of Zooms. Telehealth is another one that I think is sort of under discussed. But I think because people saw a market opportunity there, they rushed to vilification and these very appealing platitudes that are like, you're lonely because of the internet, right? Everything's going wrong because of the internet. I don't think that's quite true. I think there are certainly issues we need to solve, and we're not using it correctly. But being too optimistic about it, right, is an issue. But so is this sort of like, it's the phones. Everything's the phones. What are the forces pushing people onto the phones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about the moment that the iPhone was released and this kind of like centralization of functions into the singular object, and how that's totally changed our relationship with technology, and that there's potentially what's happening now with this fatigue. I think the fatigue is a very important like embodied factor that's causing people to look for other opportunities, but that there's a potential for like a new lifestyle kind of construction that comes with this idea of internet realism, and that could diversify our interactions with technology across the board. Have you thought about the kind of imagining new lifestyles that could emerge out of this type of perspective?
I think you're seeing the seeds of it now. This is a goofy example, and maybe some people might laugh at it, but I think the real beauty of Times Square is that it used the internet and existing structures as a tool to create a robust in-person community that seemed very exciting to outsiders. The weirdest thing about Times Square to me was not like their reactionary politics, but like they're regularly having parties. Maybe they're not creating great art, who knows, right? But there's some cultural production happening there that is grounded in physical reality and aided by the internet. And I think that we're going to start seeing more and more of that. I mean, you see it pop up all over the place now. There's increasingly more conferences and meetups. Brooke Bowman's Vibe Camp, which is, I guess, like the post-rationalist Times Square, right, is an example of that. Rationalists themselves, I think, were using the internet as a tool. And I think corporations are jumping on this too. Like Substack is doing more in-person events. Al brought to my attention over the summer, TikTok, it had a partnership with Eventbrite. I don't think that's an accident. I think people want to use social media as it was intended. I mean, that's the funny thing. Like, there was all these conversations. This is what the original vision of social media was.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. Okay, great. Well, let's turn to the chat now. I saw some good questions from Jay. is there a distinction to draw between our ethical stance towards digital tools and the ergonomic reality of them?
Like the way we use them physically?
Like, do these tools actually have like an addictive force unto themselves, or is it like the way that we approach them is something that we should like, with which we should throw caution to the wind?
No, I think you're right. We have no sort of like rules around, or like we just sort of treat it as nothing, right? An analogy I've used before is we treat the internet is like the astral plane, right? And let's enter a narrative universe where the astral plane exists, right? Um, when magicians or other practitioners of magic wanted to astral travel, you wouldn't just go into the astral plane, no holds barred, just float around, see what's up. There would be rules. There would be a way to project, right? There would be rules you would have to follow once you were there. And I think we need something similar for the internet. We need a different way to think about it. Technologically, like I think it was useful when we had computer rooms, when you logged on and logged off. There were people who would that wouldn't work for them, right? You can't catch everyone, but there is something very powerful about being off, like you can't be reached if you are offline, right? I don't know how to reintroduce that. And I'm not sure what changes we need to make with our relationship with that physical devices to reintroduce this differentiation and this carefulness with logging on. I don't think the addiction frame is right though. Like I think there's almost something insulting about being like, oh, you're addicted to your phone.
Right. And just want to remind everybody that you can also ask questions to Peter as well. So this is about the whole presentation. And you can raise your hand as well if you have a question. Go ahead, Will.
Catherine, you mentioned like alternative devices, and like, I mean, in the past I've tried like the light phone and some of these devices that are trying to be less addictive. And I actually do think that something about the colors on the screen and the incentive structures actually do make them like literally addictive. In some cases, like especially when, the platform that you're on kind of has an incentive to make them addictive. So I guess I'm curious, like if you guys, Peter or Kat, if you've tried like alternative like devices, or what you think about, the relationship that you have embodied with the device, and almost like in a posture way, like when you're on your phone, you're kind of like hunched over and like looking at it versus like, I don't know, a standing desk, or like what is the relationship we have with our physical devices?
I can answer quickly, and then Peter, you can jump in. For me, having a specific place, and I don't practice what I preach for this, what I've done in the past. Having a computer room is very helpful. And even having a place where I keep, like when I'm in my house, keeping my phone in a static place. And that's actually really helpful. And for some reason, I stick with it. But I don't hold myself accountable often enough. I think like having a designated time and physical space for these devices is very important. For me, my relationship with like my phone is as influenced by like notifications and colors so much as like I've got it in my head that this is where people are and where things are happening, right? Like I'm not like craving the validation as much as like I want like social stimulation. And so forcing myself into physical world equivalents has worked for me personally.
Yeah, I recall like the last really good party I went to, no one was on their phone. I didn't look at my phone once. And so I think being surrounded by really good, loving people in a communal setting just solves for everything. I think someone, people mentioned that in the chat. And this sort of like communal hunger causes us to kind of like, have this compulsion to look at the screens. But I am, and then it's kind of like if you do like force yourself, will yourself, whether it's through like, force of will or trying all these different kind of devices, you're going to be confronted with that existential loneliness if you don't have a community that you're in right now. So it is, there's like almost a therapeutic project regarding that. But I think that's a worthwhile project. And so I just wanted to set all that to say that there is devices out there that I think help maintain sovereignty and not kind of like fall prey to this pull. One, I used to work for these guys, Daylight Computers. That's the first blue light free tablet. And so it's like a humane tech thing. So it looks like a Kindle and it like moves, has a refresh rate like an iPad, but it's like black and white. So you don't really feel called to like browse through it or doom scroll or anything. And I just read all my Substacks there, and it's like I fall asleep with it. It just feels very cozy. So I think new technology is it's going against the grain of the trend of technology, but new technology like this will be made. But I think it needs to be in relationship with these communal experiences that, like, with this internet real life stuff that we're talking about.
Right, Nico.
Yeah, I just wanted to problematize a bit that this emphasis on localism. Obviously, not everyone lives in New York or a place that has particularly interesting people in it necessarily. And I'm curious why localism is so important to internet realism in that case.
I think there are edge cases, but for most people, it's useful. It's most healthy and it's most useful for connecting with people in their immediate environments. I think there are ways to amend that. I really relate with that. I've lived in, buttfuck nowhere, right? And I remember like at the time, Witchbox was really important to me. And I would travel places to meet people with similar interests. And I think something like that could even so in my case, I lived near Austin, but not in Austin. And I know there are people who don't even have that, like they can't drive, 40 miles to a city like Austin. But being able to travel to Austin to meet people from Witchbox, like that to me was like a great way to use the internet. And I would count that as a type of localism. I also think like you could look at examples of niche communities that would do conventions and conferences. This is happening a lot right now. It also was a hallmark of Usenet news groups, right? A lot of subcultures we still see today, like furries, otherkin, what have you, really organized there. So I guess maybe it's mostly localism, but the edge cases being like this is for some in-person physical world end, right? And for the people who can't have that, you need to really want it. It can't be so automatic to be an alternative place to have all your conversations and spend all your time. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer.
I think, yeah, it's like one way I view it, like kind of internet real life is almost like being in the right relationship with the internet, almost like seeing internet as like a person or a hyper object, and like what's being a wrong relationship with it, being enmeshed with it, being needy with it, and what's like a right relationship with the internet. And that's going to show up differently for each person, given their circumstances where they are. So someone who's not around anyone or is like around like a bunch of normie sociopaths or something might be wise not to hang around people in person and meet the others online. But I would say, I think all else being equal, if you have the opportunity to be in person with really great people, and I think that is more preferable than otherwise.
Andrew, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, this was actually more of something that came off of what Nico's question was, which was that it's not an accident that our communities make it difficult for us to hang out in person, at least a lot of the communities that have been built recently. And, it's like push-pull. It's chicken and egg. As we've given people an escape hatch or an easier way to connect or incentivize them to connect in ways that are not local, surprise, our local communities have suffered as places to provide that experience in person, like the destruction of the third place, and this goes back to like the subsidization of the car. And without getting into like all of that, I would say that you would find that local communities would be more appealing spaces to actually socially interact if they had organically evolved in ways that didn't have to coexist with a much easier option in the moment for people to escape online. And I know that, only speaking personally, I don't know any of your neighbors. I live in the same area of you, I think my attitude towards going and meeting these people has an inverse relationship with how much time I'm spending on the internet. If I am consciously making the decision to spend less time through the escape hatch, I'm like, I'm going to go see what my neighbor's up to. I happen to be lucky enough to live in a community that still has those third spaces. It's been around for a while. But I would say that it's not, localism isn't itself just, the be all end all solution. It's like it's naturally easier to hang out with people in person if they are closer to you, and it would be a more attractive option, and we'd be set up better to do so if we hadn't always had, or if we hadn't for a while had a way that we can get that elsewhere that is not as good, but good enough in some really basic, superficial ways.
I want to quickly jump in on the topic of there being not enough physical spaces to meet up with people. To go back to like the witch box example that I gave, and maybe this was just an extraordinary situation. I mean, like we would go to Starbucks's, we would hang out outside of a Little Caesars, like people who want to talk to one another, right, and socialize, find a way, even if it's like the environment is very hostile. And I think that's something I happen to agree, like it's not a lot of places aren't conducive to hanging out. Like, where do you go, right? But I think like really where there's a will, there's a way. But yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. There is something about how like, well, my online friends are more interesting. They're more based, or whatever. Like I would rather talk to them. They get me in a way that like my physical world neighbor doesn't. And I think that's an illusion. I don't think that's actually true. And what's been really scary for me is realizing like my online friends don't actually know me. There are some who really do, because I've put in a lot of effort to simulate a physical world relationship with them. But it's so easy to get seduced by the idea that these people have anything in common with you. And then one day you realize they don't. And sometimes you realize that when they develop physical world lives and you have to find a replacement for them.
I'll just kind of briefly take on there. I would say it's like, I do have friends in Toronto that are like, my based friends or my meta friends, people who also kind of like, follow my work and do stuff with me online. And it is more enjoyable having conversations with them because there's more things we can talk about. It's like the conversational space is just wider than when I, just talk to someone that, doesn't know me or is not into this type of stuff. Like Camille and I, my wife, we joined a bowling league recently, and it was fun. It was good. It was good activity, getting out to meet the locals in our area. But yeah, there is that tension. There's like, they can't see me or relate with me in a certain way where these, more online people that I've met online, I should say, can relate with me. So I just don't want to acknowledge that there does feel like there's an active tension for me in that regard.
Great. We're now coming to the top of the hour, whatever that hour may be for all of you in these different time zones. So we had a pretty structured initial hour here, and then we're going to move more into this kind of distributed conversation. So we have a 3-minute break scheduled. People, if you want to go get something to drink or take a bathroom break, and then we'll come back for a collective presencing session. Thank you, everyone, so much for all of your great questions and for the presentations as well. This has been very interesting.